what is that called? The third wall, the fourth wall. One of the characters broke down a wall and was like, y'all not actually doing anything. Hey y'all, welcome back. I hope all has been well. I am back with another video to give my reviews on books I have had my head buried in for the past month. If you watched my April TBR, you know I had big goals, big plans to get through most, if not all, of the recommendations made to me by friends and or co-workers. I didn't. But I did get through a few, plus some other reads that I had on my TBR. So I am going to share with you how all of that went. As always, interact in the comments and let me know if you've read any of these or if any of the ones I mentioned pique your interest and you're going to check them out. So I'll start with the recommendations I was able to get to. My first one was to check out the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy. I read the first book, Gild, and I wasn't too sure about how I felt about it at the end. I ended up giving it like a 3-star, and the plot of it is really interesting. So I decided to give the second book a try and ended up reading the third book as well, and it's a 6-book series. Overall, where I left off at the end of book 3, the series is sitting at like a 3.5 for me. It's not the most lyrical or descriptive fantasy that I've read, but again, the plot is interesting. The story centers around Auren, who is covered in gold, from her skin to her hair, nails, the color of her irises. For the past decade, she's been living in a gilded cage within a golden palace ruled by King Midas. Right away, you can see the play on the classic mythology of King Midas, but this one comes with a twist. A couple of them. In this version, King Midas is presented as a savior, a protector of Auren, and his way of protecting her was to confine her to a gilded golden cage. In the world of Auren, there were once 7 kingdoms, and now there are 6. In the history of this realm, there is a connection to the Fae, and many of the descendants of Auren's realm can trace their bloodlines back to the Fae. Most of the first book focused on Auren, her life within the palace, and the complex dynamic that existed between her and Midas. One of the main things that I wanted to see was Auren's character development. When would she realize that the Midas she knew as a child is not the man that he is now? When would she start to stand up for herself in the very patriarchal and the very misogynistic world that she lives in? That was one of my biggest issues with this story, because of how much of that existed. Like, I couldn't stand it. Auren was constantly objectified. And even though she is known as the Gilded Girl, the idea is that appearances can be deceiving. Just because she shines on the outside doesn't mean her life has been easy. Her journey towards recognizing her inherent value, independent of how others perceive her, is significant. I'm planning to finish the rest of the series to see how everything unfolds. It's safe to say that this recommendation turned out to be pretty good. The next recommendation I got to was Watership Down by Richard Adams. This book was a journey in more ways than one. I started Watership Down towards the end of the month, and I had planned to do a whole reading vlog on it. I had started to record and all. To be honest, I initially struggled with the book. It took me 2 weeks to get through it. This book isn't my usual read. I would start recording and reading, and after a short time, I'd find myself getting distracted.
It's so unhealthy. Plenty of salads if you're following Martha. I'm not a rabbit. You could be. You could look like one.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine if you were on the Titanic? Okay. There were words that I didn't know. I got hung up on wanting to make sure I understood every word. Now, of course, I know how to use context clues to figure things out, but there were just some words that I didn't know what they meant. There were also so many descriptions of the characters traveling and various details, and I had a hard time visualizing it all. I'm that type of reader. When I read, I'm also like trying to create the scene in my mind, and I don't know, it was just overwhelming in a way. I couldn't visualize where the rabbits were going and what they were doing. Like, for example, again, traveling over the heather or traveling through a heather. Like, what is a heather? A heather is a purple flowered Eurasian heath that grows abundantly on moorland and heathland. A heath is an area of open, uncultivated land, especially in Britain, with characteristic vegetation of heather, gorse, and coarse grasses. However, my experience completely changed when I decided to try the audiobook. I had never used Hoopla before this, but it had been on my phone for a while, and from the recommendation of a coworker, and I was like, okay, it's one of my goals this year anyway to read or listen to an audiobook. So I was like, maybe it just sparked one day. I'm like, maybe I should try this as an audiobook. The author wrote this story because it's a story that he created for his children. And I was like, maybe it would just hit different if I were to listen to it. And it did make a world of difference. I ended up thoroughly enjoying the story. One of my concerns about reading or listening to an audiobook was that I would get distracted, that I wouldn't pay attention. But the narrator was amazing. The audiobook really held my interest. It was really convenient for me to listen to, especially when I had to do things like redo my hair. Watership Down is about a group of rabbits who leave their warren, that was one of the new words I learned, due to a foretold tragedy, and they embark on a journey to find a new home. It's an epic adventure filled with challenges and self-discovery. Interestingly enough, the author mentions in his preface note that he didn't mean for his work to be a direct parallel or parable to real life. But I don't see how, because it definitely turned out like that. You know, all of those literary devices that they teach us in school, from allegories to imagery, metaphors, foreshadowing. There were so many techniques woven into this story. This book explores several themes, including survival, the importance of home, whether that be physical or community wise, heroism, cunning and cleverness, violence, whether that be for survival or protection, and individual freedom. The rabbit's journey is not just a physical one, it's emotional and spiritual. They face predators, including humans, and learn about different ways of living. It's about bravery, sacrifice, and trusting in the ones that we call family. It's also a story within a story, as the rabbits themselves tell stories to each other to motivate each other, reminding them of their strength and their heritage. These aren't your typical Bugs Bunny rabbits. These rabbits are complex and dealing with some serious challenges. Despite my initial struggles with reading it, Watership Down became a 5 out of 5 for me. I can recognize the quality and the fullness of the work, even if it's not my usual read. I took some quick pit stops during the month by picking up some reads from the Kindle library. I read one of those spicy Yakuza books. Owned was a short, okay read, but the main male character was a bit too controlling for my liking. I also read Blackthorn, which is a semi-gothic paranormal romance that ended up being a 3-star read. The main character, Charlotte, is a descendant of people from Earth who had to resettle on another planet after the resources and the climate on Earth became limited and too harsh. All of the original settlers had to undergo a treatment to alter their DNA so that they would be able to survive on the new planet. Though there were those that suffered an unexpected mutation, Charlotte's love interest was one of those individuals, and he ended up with the qualities of a vampire. Speaking of vampires, I finally finished Mistress of Lies by KM Enright. The book's plot is a blend of romantic fantasy, dark fantasy, mystery, and vampire fiction. Now, I don't think it delivered on all of those fronts. As mentioned previously, the main character, Sean LeClaire, is out to right some wrongs in the very classist and political society her and her twin live in. She lives in a society where those that are able to do blood magic are higher in the hierarchy, and those that aren't, like her twin, who are also referred to as the unblooded, are lower. The central plot revolves around an investigation into the murders of the unblooded citizens. She has been tasked by the Vampire King to solve these murders, along with Samuel, a man who has a gift of his own, and Isaac, the right-hand man to the king. The biggest problem I had with this book was that there was more telling than showing. In fact, to me, there wasn't a lot being done on the investigative front. In fact, even one of the characters calls this out. Like, what is that called? The third wall, the fourth wall. One of the characters broke down a wall and was like, y'all not actually doing anything. Another example is Samuel, a character who has been brought up in the slums, raised by a single parent, and struggling with his gift, eventually gets the opportunity to train. There was no actual seeing him doing that. Another thing I was looking forward to was the romance between Isaac, Sean, and Samuel. There was definitely an attraction between them, though it was underdeveloped. The vampire elements were also unconventional. The vampire king is the only vampire present in the story. He's long lived and performs these annual blood sacrifices, but he doesn't fit the traditional image of a vampire. The book doesn't fully explain the source of his mortality and why he's unique. To its credit, the book does touch on themes of oppression, inequality, and social injustices. There's also diversity and LGBTQIA representation. Many of the characters have Filipino heritage. And with that being said, shout out to it being Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Isaac is a trans Filipino man and Samuel is pansexual. Despite my critiques, I am still intrigued enough to continue the series. I've added the second book to my TBR to see how things go. Cursebound was definitely one of the books I was eager to get to this month. It is the second book of a trilogy from Sarah L. Arifi. To give a little context, the story is revolving around a elven warrior called Auren and her sister Leto, who is a diviner. They've been forced into the dangerous wilderness and encountered the long lost Fae. They found themselves torn between loyalties to their elven tribe, to each other, and new desires. I had some mixed feelings about the second book. It didn't live up to how I felt about the first one. The author mentions in her ending notes that writing a sequel can be difficult. And I can sympathize with that. I know I sit here and give my likes and dislikes and critiques and everything, but I cannot imagine spending the time, effort, showing the vulnerability in writing a book and putting it out there for people to read. I am always cognizant of how much time and effort an author takes in putting their work out there. Cursebound introduced some new characters and the continuation of Auren, Leto, and others addressing various conflicts and mysteries from the first book. This part of the trilogy had multiple POVs, many of them going over the same happenings from their perspectives. As a reader, you get to see where there is a lot of unnecessary conflict because of miscommunication and secret keeping. My rating for Cursebound ended up being a 3.75. The ending for Cursebound sets up for what I hope will be a strong conclusion in the final book. Well, it was definitely a month of exploring some interesting recommendations and diving deeper into some ongoing series. If you enjoyed hearing about my reading journey for the month of April, definitely leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you are returning, thank you for coming back and joining me for another video. As always, let me know down below in the comments what you checked out for the month of April and if any of the ones I mentioned you're going to check out. Until next time, stay safe, be blessed, and remain unapologetically you.